Welcome to a deeper look at freedom. I'm Chris Morstead with Kilburn Koontz and Kyle Torgeson. This is a new show that we're going to be doing. You guys think once a month? Once a month we're going to try to do it. Maybe a little bit more if we can.
Yeah, maybe more.
If time
At least
allows.
once a month.
Basically, our show today is going to, and our show in the future is going to focus on current political issues, talking about the Constitution and how the average, American interprets it, understands it, and reads it. And then we're going to be talking about amendments and topics that you guys suggest to us that you'd like to talk about. Today we are here to talk about a letter that you brought to our attention, Kilburn, that was written by KrisAnne Hall, who is a constitutional attorney, educator, author, speaker, and radio host. And this is a letter that she wrote to the nation's governors, legislators, prosecutors, all that kind of stuff and things like that about gun legislation, or is it? Tell us what got going on here, Kilburn.
So I'll do a quick description, and then we can read the background, which explains the purpose of the letter. But it's the title is "Open Letter to Governors, Attorneys General, the Legislators of these United States, and the People, along with their sheriffs and peace officers," from KrisAnne Hall.
Okay.
And so I think we're going to end up sharing a link, so if anyone goes live, they can check it out, or you can just Google search or whatever your preferred search platform is for KrisAnne Hall and look for the open letter. And this one's in regard to a recent initiative that was passed in Washington State. It's Initiative 1639, which basically it does so many things, but
it's what we would call, if we're going to explain it to like how we view it, we would call this anti-gun legislation.
Yeah, anti-gun, yeah.
And we consider this legislation to be infringing upon our Second Amendment rights guaranteed to us in the Constitution, and even more so in our Washington State Constitution, because our state constitution is actually more solid than our national constitution. So that's the thing that confuses me about Washington State and all this gun legislation that we're passing, is that our state constitution is even more clear than the U.S. Constitution. So this is a huge thing here in Washington State. We are a big gun state. We have a lot of forest lands up here, a lot of woods, a lot of camping activities, fishing, hunting, that type of stuff. So this is something that is different from our state compared to other states. Like let's say New York. They don't have a gun. Gun culture like we do.
Yeah, well, they might up in upstate New York.
Maybe in upstate New York and stuff like that. But the city folk, they go to indoor shooting ranges, and they don't get to shoot like what we do here in the Northwest.
I see. So
it's just explaining that. So this letter is basically a letter that she has sent out to people, and what is she telling them and breaking down for them in this letter? I mean, what is the gist of her sending this letter out?
She's basically explaining why Initiative 1639 and other bills and laws like it are unconstitutional, why people should not heed these laws or bills because they are unconstitutional. So why don't I just read the background, and then we'll start going through it. So the background is both Washington State Governor Jay Inslee and Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson have issued letters regarding the state of Washington's Initiative 1639 and Washington law enforcement officials' refusal to enforce the measure in part or in total. Similar laws are being passed by legislators and signed into law by the governors of other states, sadly with little protest. Proponents of Washington's Initiative 1639 and those critical of the law enforcement officials cite a duty to the Constitution and to the rule of law. Yet in many respects, these laws are built on the circumvention and abdication of the rule of law. The Constitution and its underlying principles define the rule of law. As such, the rule of law, in quotations, cannot be synonymous with the will of the majority, as Washington's AG suggests, when the majority's will advocates the suspension of due process and the revocation of a person's natural rights, which all officials involved in this debate swore an oath to uphold. So 1639 is an infringement upon people's inherent rights to be able to defend themselves or their family or their city or state or even country by any means that they deem necessary, you know, which is what the Second Amendment is about. And then it's was it Section 24, I believe, in the Washington State Constitution.
Right.
So
one of the things I found interesting about this gun legislation is that this is actually the gun legislation that's being looked at in the legislature in Washington State. A lot of it has been at the request of our Attorney General. So he is a guy that's actually going after the guns. And so just so you guys know, we think he's going to try to run for governor here in Washington State to fill Jay Inslee's seat, because Jay Inslee's running for president, and Bob Ferguson's a guy we cannot let get elected as a governor, because he just does not respect the Constitution, and that's clear with the things that he's been asking legislators to do.
Right.
So going further into this letter here, can you throw that back up there for us, Kyle?
Yep, of course.
Go ahead, and do you just want to kind of continue to read the letter and then kind of talk about what's on it?
Yeah, we can do that. The Declaration of Independence lays before us the premise and purpose of all governments, past, present, and future. It states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." And so if we do not consent, then they cannot hold us accountable under the Constitution. And also the law on its face is unconstitutional. And then, I mean, for people that don't know, and I don't know that we need to get into it here, but look up the whole process of how 1639 got to the ballot.
Right.
And it broke the code and the rules for initiatives already,
right,
before it even got to the ballot.
Correct. And that was the first part about this law that was controversial, is how the signatures were gathered to get it on the ballot. There was a lot of fraud and a lot of explaining it to people as they come into their grocery stores. They would have a $30 car tab initiative, and then they would have a no tax on groceries initiative, and then they would just sign this one in there, not explain to them what it was, and people would thinking that they were still signing one of these other types of legislations. And our Supreme Court in Washington State ruled that it is okay to trick people to sign initiative ballots. I mean, that's basically what they ruled by their decision. Is they're saying, we don't care how you gather the signatures, and we don't care whether you gather the signatures illegally or not. We're going to go ahead and throw this on the ballot. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, they know that it was illegally gathered. There was enough evidence. I mean, you guys, there was enough people out there with their cell phones recording videos of these people gathering signatures illegally, and still the courts ruled this to be constitutional and threw it on the ballot. This is why, when Bob Ferguson says, well, the Supreme Court has to rule on this in Washington State, they're the only ones that can say it's unconstitutional. And that's not, that's just not true either, because we know that our Washington State Constitution will make this illegal because Bob Ferguson has told them to. We know that this is how they will rule. That's just my personal beliefs, and we've seen them do it on another bill, another initiative this year. The same thing with the police initiative, the anti-cop legislation that we were looking at. Right. They had issues with that one getting on the ballot as well. And again, the courts, even the courts really did something even really way off the charts when it came to that one there. I mean, they had an amendment that they wanted to fix. They threw that amendment in there. It went to the courts. The courts threw the amendment out that everybody agreed on, and then threw it on the ballot as is. And so, I mean, again, Of course, they've already fixed this one up there in Olympia. You know, it takes a super majority to touch any initiative for 2 years, unless you can get a majority. And they've already got that majority, and they've already fixed this one. But they will not do anything with 1639 because they want to take our guns.
Well, Chris, the thing that you didn't mention as well is the Supreme Court actually overturned a lower court's ruling, which was the Thurston County judge, Judge Dixon. He ruled that 1639 could not be on the ballot because it did not follow the rules of initiatives.
This is a judge who held up a copy of the initiative in his courtroom and says, "Tell me you can read that."
Right.
And you couldn't. And so again,
there's many reasons why it did not follow the rules of initiatives in Washington State. And then the Supreme Court stepped in and overturned his ruling and said, "Well, let's put it on the ballot and see what the voters say," which is ridiculous, really.
Right. Our
state
is
obviously a political move.
Right. Because they knew that the residents and the voters of Seattle, who decide everything for the rest of the state, they knew that they would vote to put it on there. They don't care whether they're leftists. They don't. The goal is they want to meet their goal, and they don't care how they get there to that goal. They don't understand that destroying a constitutional right is not how you fix a problem.
Right. But and it's not a constitutional right. It's an inherent natural right that is guaranteed by the Constitution. So even if, God forbid, they somehow amend the Constitution to say, you know what, you guys don't get to defend yourself and your family however you want. We're going to remove the right to bear arms.
I'd like to argue that they don't even have to have a majority to change the Constitution, because with every piece of legislation that they keep adding to restrict the guns, that dismantles that amendment a little bit at a time.
Even if they did that, it would still not be true, because we have an unalienable
it's
right
a hard word to say.
To self-defense.
And there's no going back.
Yeah. It's by virtue of birth. You okay?
Yeah. So let's get on to the sole purpose of government.
So the sole purpose of government is to secure the rights of all people equally and individually. Okay? And so the entire purpose of any form of government is to secure the rights of individual citizens. Our foundational documents. I lost this.
The rights of our foundation.
The rights our foundational documents refer to are those classified as inherent rights, which is what we were talking about. And they consist of life, liberty, property, and the right to personally secure them in the best manner possible. The most basic of natural rights is the right to self-preservation. And no, that doesn't mean you get to make your own jam. Okay?
Darn it.
That just means you get to protect your own life. That's what that means. To which the natural right to secure property is connected, because basically the right to self-preservation means that you own yourself, and so that's how it ties property rights. No person is secure in their life if they cannot also personally secure that life and the property upon which life is dependent. So we're lucky today that we do not need to own property to secure our life. But back in the day, when everybody grew their own food,
some people still do grow their own food.
And but back in the day when this was written, everybody grew their own food, and there's farmers markets and stuff. But being self-reliant and self-sustaining on your own property was very important.
Right.
And it still is. And so that's really why owning property is important.
Property rights are one of something that's really important in rural Washington. Not so much in like the cities, because a lot of people live in apartment buildings and stuff like that. So it means more to us folks who are living in, like, say, the county or rural cities like Kelso, Longview. We can actually buy some home with a little bit of land out of it, around us, and which you can't do that a lot in Seattle. Right. But I'd like to point out here, that it's real clear in here. It says, and the right to personally secure them in the best manner possible.
Right.
Now, when we're talking about, securing ourselves and our property, the best manner isn't dialing 911. I mean, because you have to wait for the police to get there. You have to be able to defend your property at the moment that an attack or whatever is going on starts. I mean, you cannot wait. We've well established that if you wait for the cops, it's going to be too late by the time they get there.
Yeah, I mean, every situation is different, but if the situation requires you to defend yourself and possibly with lethal force, because whoever might be the aggressor does not want to give up, then even I was talking about this with somebody earlier today. Even brandishing a weapon can deter attackers. Just showing a gun a lot of times, and probably most times, will deter attackers unless they're kind of just not really with it, or they don't understand what's happening, and they're just kind of acting on reflex or something.
Right. Now, we live in an open carry state, and this is something, because of 1639 that's been passed, they're really messing with our ability to conceal and carry weapons. So I've been telling people, you know what, just exercise open carry in the state of Washington. And when somebody yells at you for doing an open carry type of thing, you just look at them and say, well, in our state, some people voted to make it so that I can't cover it up. And they're making it harder for people to carry guns. It's absolutely crazy, this legislation, when I can walk out of my house with my gun on my hip out in the open without any problem whatsoever. But the minute I want to cover it up and conceal it, we have a problem. It's confusing to me. Anyway.
Yep. Yeah, and then it continues, if a person is in danger of loss of life, liberty, or property and has not the personal right along with the individual ability to secure these essential rights, then each person is dependent upon someone else's desire to protect them, reducing every person to that of an indentured or tributary slave, indebted in life to those who are tasked with its security.
So basically, nobody's going to protect your stuff as best as you can.
Exactly. Yeah, and nobody should even want to protect you more than you want to protect
It's
yourself.
like, hey, Kyle, guard my wife and family as I go out to the bar. I'm sure you're going to do that. Just, right? Right. Sure. Of course. Thanks, Kyle. So, moving on to the second part of here, we've got the origin of legislative power. So what are we talking about? Now, remember, you guys, this letter was written by a constitutional attorney named KrisAnne Hall. So she's she's smarter than us for sure. Kel's an engineer, so maybe not too much smarter, but so she, she is well versed in this, and she understands the Constitution and how it works. So, what does she say about the origin of legislative power?
Right, and obviously she's a lot smarter than me on the Constitution.
Oh yeah,
a bunch of other things. But so going back to,
well, it only gets complicated when you try to interpret the Constitution. All these guys that are overthinking it.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
if
you read it, it's just really simple. I mean, it's not that confusing.
Right. Well, people that want to treat it as a living document where they get to change the definition of terms to match modern times, which is code word for change the definition of terms to make it read the way they want it to read.
Perfect example of that would be the automatic labeling all the guns automatic, right?
Semi-automatic assault weapons.
Yeah, assault weapons. Labeling even a single action shotgun to a semi-automatic level, and that's what they've done. Is they've changed the description of the word to turn all these guns into assault rifles, which they aren't.
That term only refers to a very specific weapon. Right. But moving on, so. The origin of legislative power, that individual rights precede legislative rights, precede legislative power. Therefore, legislative power exists solely to ensure individual rights. Okay? So then she's going to explain that here. The legislator with his delegated responsibility cannot be exalted above the inherent rights of the individual which he is charged to protect. Life, liberty, and property do not exist because people have legislators who have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused people to entrust legislators with the power to make laws in the first place. So the justification it was passed by the legislature does not and should not override an inherent individual right, even more so when the legislature is admonished by the supreme law to not infringe upon said right. And so basically that goes down to the idea of delegated authority, that the authority with which the legislators act is authority that was delegated or given to them by us, because all the power in a constitutional republic, which is what the United States is inherent within the people. That's why the preamble to the Declaration of Independence says "we the people," because, you know, like I just said, the power is inherent within we the people, and the power that the government has is delegated authority, and that also goes back to the idea of just rule with the consent of the governed, which means that if they overstep the authority, the delegated authority that we give them, then we have the right and really the duty to withdraw our consent. And that's what's happening here in Washington State right now with these sheriffs that are standing up against 1639 and saying, essentially, we withdraw our consent on this term for this law, because this law is unconstitutional. It's really unenforceable, okay? And I was talking to some people as well, and they say if we try to follow the letter of the law, it will actually be impossible. And if they try to follow the letter of the law, in July, all gun sales will have to shut down, because there's no way to ensure that everybody is going to follow all the the requirements for purchasing a weapon or a firearm.
Something interesting happened, I think it was yesterday, here in the state of Washington. All of these counties where the sheriffs have stated that they won't enforce this law, the governor and our attorney general have written a letter to every single one of the gun stores that are in those counties saying that you will enforce the law. I haven't seen a copy of the letter that it was sent out, but basically it was a threatening letter to business owners saying you will enforce this law or else. So these guys aren't even waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on it. They know it's in challenge. They know that there's lawsuits, stopping it, and they're still, turning the screws on the citizens to not do this. And to the gun owners and the businesses out there that are saying that you guys will still sell firearms to people under the age of 21, thank you, because federal law still allows for that for them. And that's, there we go. Our attorney general and our governor, they decide which laws they pick and choose to follow and enforce. Right. In our state, our attorney general is screaming, "You guys will enforce this gun law. You will enforce this gun law." At the same time, he's not enforcing immigration laws. At the same time, there's a whole list of things
federal cannabis
that he refuses to enforce because he doesn't agree with it. Not because the courts ruled it unconstitutional, because Bob Ferguson ruled it unconstitutional, and that's what he's doing here with our guns. He doesn't care what the courts have to say. It's going to be what he wants, and they will do what he wants. And he's made that very clear.
Right, yeah, and the other thing is now the media is picking this up, and they're actually starting to go after the sheriffs. I read an article that was actually out of the UK by The Guardian, so you guys can go search for this. Just search for Guardian 1639 in Washington. It should come right up. And basically, they called out our sheriff, Brad Thurman, by name. And Brad is actually, I think he's being very smart, and he's saying, well, we should wait and see what the courts say before we decide, and some guys come out hard against it, other guys are coming out hard for it, and he's kind of saying, let's just see what happens before we kind of get ahead of ourselves here.
Well,
and I really respect that. But the reason why I brought up the Guardian article is because they state explicitly in there that the sheriffs opposing 1639 are racist white supremacists.
Correct.
And they're pulling out the standard leftist fare talking points whenever they have somebody they disagree with. They bring out this racist crap.
As part of the media here, you know, we do NDN, which is a separate thing from this show, but we get information about journalists and things like that. So the other day I called you and I let you know about a teleconference phone call that went on in the state of Washington the other day with reporters and a anti-gun group out of Oregon, where this big phone conversation happened, where they were actually colluding together to let everybody know that they were going to start painting these sheriffs as white nationalists, white supremacists, and all this thing. So there is an organized effort in the state of Washington and from outside of the state of Washington to smear these sheriffs who are upholding their pledge to the Constitution and to the citizens.
Yeah, you know,
that is some pretty crazy things.
It is crazy, and it's really, to me, a great indication of where we are in history, that we have elements within the mainstream media, and it's probably a large portion of it in the 90 percentile that are going against the Constitution. They're going against the foundations of this country, and they say things like constitutionalists are anti-government, which is so ridiculous upon its face, because the Constitution was what defined what our government was going to be. It was the founding documents for our government. So if you believe in the Constitution, you believe in the government. You believe in the government even more than they do.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, Kelburn, we have seen this type of history, this type of behavior in history before, and you know, so this is for the people that are history buffs and are reading history before they can change it. Like I said, believe me, get out there and start reading history before they change it, because they are changing it every day. This stuff has happened before, and this isn't new. So, you know, we just it's just unbelievable that we've let it get so far, that it's gotten so far. So now we've discussed the definition of just power.
No, legislative power.
Legislative power. Yep. We're going to go on to the definition of just power.
Yeah. So,
so tell us, Kelburn, what is the definition of just power?
Well, Chris, as you can read on the screen, and our viewers can as well, the definition of just power is just power of government secures the individual's rights above all other objectives. So in stark contrast to what Sideshow Bob, as they lovingly refer to Bob Ferguson, in stark contrast to what he's doing. So it goes on, therefore it is a just government which impartially secures to every man whatever is his, individually and personally. It is because of this duty to protect the individual's natural rights that every government in these United States incorporates the requirement of due process for the suspension of these rights. It is not a just government, nor is an individual's right secure under it, where the property of a man, or the property which a man has in his personal safety and personal liberty, is violated by arbitrary seizures of one class of citizens for the comfort or peace of mind of the rest, even if the rest constitutes 60% of the population, or even if it's 99% of the population.
Basically, she's going back to, again, our system in this nation does not do rule by law. It doesn't
rule by majority.
Right. We don't rule by majority. Right. We rule by the structure that we have set up. We don't deviate from that. We have an instruction guide, you guys, that tells us how to do it. And ever since we started changing this is when our country started going downhill. We need to restore this document, not change the meanings of it, not pick it apart a little bit at a time. So let's go on to what the definition of unjust powers. What are unjust powers, Kelburn?
Unjust power is the power exercised by government to the destruction of the individual's rights. So the mere existence of a majority desire does not override the natural rights of the minority. To create and enforce laws merely because the majority desire the law to be so, absent any regard to personal and individual rights, is nothing more than a tyranny of the majority. It is through this errant political motivation that history's greatest injustices have taken place, even here in America. It was once the majority opinion that a minority of people could, by law, be placed in a state of permanent and inherent servitude. It was once the majority opinion that a minority of people could be legally classified as mere property or chattel. It was once the majority opinion that legally enforced physical segregation of the majority from a minority was appropriate. It was once the majority opinion that a minority of Japanese Americans and Hopi Indians could lawfully be imprisoned indefinitely in internment camps without due process. Americans ought to be learning from these mistakes, not fighting to repeat them. The majority of Americans would agree that a single dictator with the power to oppress is a wicked and unjust government. Please then explain how the tyranny of the majority is any different than the despotism of one in the lives of those whose rights are violated. So, I mean, this all goes back to the idea of the constitutional republic being the form of government that the United States should have. In the Constitution, it says that it is the duty of the federal government to ensure that all the states have a Republican form of government. And this was written before they had parties where you had a Republican Party and Democrat Party and the other parties. What they mean by that is a constitutional republic, okay, where the government...
Government is like daddy.
Well, as it stated earlier, the sole purpose of the government is to protect the rights of the individuals.
Right.
Okay, and so the interesting thing is you know, on the left, they always come out with these special rights.
Mm-hmm.
You have rights for special groups based on, you know, their ethnicity or their sexuality or, you know, any other kind of
that
divider
like
that you can think of. And yet, if they would go back to the Constitution and say, well, actually, all these people, in addition to belonging to these certain groups, they're all individuals. And so if the government just would do as they're supposed to do and protect individual rights, then all of these people would be taken care of as well. And
right.
So all these people fighting for rights and everything, they should really be fighting for the Constitution.
Right.
You know?
That's what protects the rights. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And you know, and then this goes back to you know, the reason why she's bringing this up is because 1639 was passed by, I think, 7 counties that had the majority of the population in Washington.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
when you break down our state and you put a county by county map up there, I think we have 28 counties in our state.
39.
39. Is it 39 now?
Yeah.
No, it's been 39 for a long time. Anyway, no, I don't know why I keep throwing that number 28 out there. There's something else. I know why. Anyway,
Okay.
so we have that many counties out there, and when you look at that map, like Kilburn said, about 7 of those counties all around the Seattle area, you know, the whole state is red, except for Seattle, where there's just this little blue.
Yeah. There's a couple others too.
Yeah,
Clark, Whitman, Spokane.
Yeah, Clark's a toss-up now.
Yeah, I know.
Spokane's going downhill quick.
Yeah.
Not Spokane Valley. We hear you guys are great out there in Spokane Valley. But anyway, hey, we're about halfway through the letter. We need to take a real quick break, you guys. So if you guys have a few minutes, hang around, and we'll come back and we'll break out down the second half of this letter.
And leave comments.
Yes, comments. We do have some comments. If you guys have some questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them when we come back. Welcome back to a deeper look at freedom with Chris Bornstead, Kel Coons, and Kyle Torgerson down here at the end. Today we are discussing a letter that was written by constitutional attorney, educator, author, speaker, and radio host KrisAnne Hall regarding legislation out of Washington State that is numbered 1639, which we have all here labeled anti-gun legislation. Kilburn, we've been about halfway through the letter. So far, you know, it's a really well-written letter. I know that us breaking it down like this, it might be hard to read this and listen to it at the same time. So, you know, after the show, if you're a viewer, be sure to read through this and just let it soak in. But when we left, we were on number 5. Is that right?
Yep.
So we're going to be talking about the will of the majority is contrary to the rule of law, or is that the one that we just covered?
That's the one we're going to cover.
That's the one we are going to cover. So the majority rule is synonymous with the tyranny of the majority, not with the security of the rights. So go ahead and tell us about this one here, Kilburn.
Right. And, you know, I just wanted to make a quick little observation.
Sure.
That the left is the group that seems to be the most interested in the rights of minorities. And yet the tyranny of the majority is exactly stepping on the rights of the minority. And so you can't claim to be for minority rights if you are for majority tyranny. So anyway, so like Chris said, majority rule is synonymous with tyranny of the majority, not with security of rights. The rule of law is a term that has been understood throughout history to mean a standard to limit the overreach of government and curb lawlessness. It does not mean the authority of the government to rule over the people. The independent states of America and their central government were created with written constitutions to maintain a written limited standard for government to prevent the will of the majority and those who govern to usurp the rights of the individual. The so-called will of the majority cannot be synonymous with the rule of law. If that can be the case, then those who are disposed to usurp the rights of the people need only to control the will of the majority, either through manipulations, coercions, fear, or brute force. It is because of this truth of the tyranny of the majority that every government in these United States is required to exist as a republic, not a pure democracy, that every law to be created through equal representation and is to be governed by and limited to the ultimate purpose of all government, the security of the rights of the individual through written constitutions. When any form of government operates contrary to these foundations, that government has exceeded its proper function, acting in direct opposition to its own purpose. The law has been used to destroy its own objective. It has been applied to annihilating the justice that it was supposed to maintain, to limiting and destroying rights which its real purpose was to respect. It has converted lawful defense of life, liberty, and property into a crime in order to punish the lawful defense of these essential and natural rights. So in her language that she uses when she writes these letters is similar to the language that the founders used when writing the Constitution. And basically, I think it was the way they spoke and the way they wrote last, 200 years ago. So it might be hard for some people to follow. But basically what she's saying here is the will of the majority is not a just way to govern because, 51% can rule over 49%. And, obviously everyone knows that's not fair. You can tell a kindergartner that and they would know that's not fair. But
I think they have told kindergartners this kind of stuff, and they're like, "Well, that's not right."
I know. Well, I talk to my children about what's going on, and just tell them, and they're like looking at me like, "What?"
Anyways. Yeah, we tried explaining taxes to our youngest daughter last night because a question came up, and she goes, "Well, they can't do that. They can't take your money that you work for." I go, "You just go ahead and keep thinking that." Because yes, they can, and yes, they do.
Right. But getting back to majority rule being synonymous with the tyranny of the majority and not with security of rights. So they mentioned that pure democracy was not the intention for the United States government. And what we have here with 1639, since it was initiated and passed through the initiative process, which is a direct democracy, that as actually flies in the face with the intentions of the founders.
Right.
You know, the founders meant for laws to be passed by legislators who were then going to be held accountable on the next election cycle for their actions, right? So when a legislator votes for a law, you know that it was them who voted for it, and you can hold them accountable directly. When you have an initiative like this, there's really no one person you can hold accountable because there's so many people involved in the process. And then, you know, the process of voting is distributed across the whole state to all the voters. And so you can't point at a single legislator and ask them, well, why did you vote this way for this?
Right.
You know.
And the other thing too that, you know, I love reading comments online, and another thing that somebody brought up is that you know, well, they had a majority on this in the election. Well, in the election that might be the majority, but there's a lot of people out there in the state of Washington that don't vote because they don't think it does any good because of stuff like the $30 car tabs. How many times in our state have we passed $25, $30 car tabs?
Well,
several times.
Once.
Yeah, and they always find a way around it. So, you know, anyway, continue.
Well, yeah, and then also, well, let's just keep going there.
So
I had a thought and it went away.
It happens. It happens. So number 6, when the laws government operate contrary to the individual rights. 1, the government is operating contrary to its sole purpose. 2, the government is not operating with just power. 3, the people are not free. It becomes the duty of all who love and respect the rights of the children to protect the citizens from the unjust operation of government. When those entrusted in government to secure the rights of the individuals turn that trust into a tool to deny those rights, it is incumbent upon those who understand the obvious limits of government and the necessity of those limits to stand in opposition to that unjust use of authority. Just as those in America's past who refused to enforce the Federal Fugitive Slave Act because of its obvious abuse of power and destruction of rights wielded by those legislators who ratified it into law. Those of us who have taken the oath to secure the rights of the people who understand the magnitude of that solemn promise and the unavoidable and tragic consequences of failing to uphold that promise feel morally compelled to take a stand. How noble an example would American history have if there was just one sheriff in Montgomery, Alabama, who recognized that law ratified by legislators, signed by the governor, reflecting the will of the majority, was not a just law after all. What if instead of arresting Miss Rosa Parks, the sheriff refused to enforce a law that deprived an individual of her rights and instead protected those rights, escorting Miss Parks in whichever seat she chose all the way home? Those who are dedicated to their just and unlawful duty to secure the rights of the people understand that at these times the will of the majority and the distortion of the rule of law's definition must be resisted. You want to pick up there and continue to read there, Kilburn? You want me to keep going?
No, I will do it. The right to individually secure our life, liberty, and property is no different than our rights to freedom of speech, freedom to peaceably assemble, or freedom to worship and live out our faith. A law that establishes that a person is prohibited from possessing any degree of property, but especially property essential to the personal security of individual rights without due process, ought to be seen as arbitrary. Capricious legislature moved by the tragedy du jour should not be the model for sound and stable government that protects liberty. If the governments of these United States mean to obtain or deserve the full praise due to wise and just governments, they will equally respect the rights of property and every inherent right of the individual. If they truly wish for a free and strong nation, they will endeavor to sacredly guard all forms of individual property and resist all desires to violate the individual's right, regardless of the opinion of the majority or the fleeting emotion of the day. They will not seek to target the bad guys by stripping law-abiding citizens of their inherent rights and turning otherwise lawful behaviors into crimes. Our inherent rights are not killing innocents, so why are our rights targeted? Oppression doesn't bring safety. Our governments should seek to be a pattern liberty, and example of just government, so that our posterity may truly be free. And posterity means future generations. Okay? I mean, you guys can see there's a through line in this letter here, that the power resides in the people. The government, the sole purpose of government is to protect the rights of every individual person. That the government needs to respect people's property, and most of all, that the government needs to respect and understand what people's rights are and not to infringe it or impair them.
It's really scary when you look at some of the legislation that we have here in Washington State up in Olympia right now, because I mean, our state is just, I mean, it's just crazy how it is. If anybody was screaming for you know, a change to electoral college, it's rural Washington, because we just keep getting thrown under the bus. We have to pay for everything, and then Seattle tells us, well, without us, you guys wouldn't have any tax money. And we're like, what?
Right. Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean we wouldn't?
Yeah. Well, then they couldn't build monorails to nowhere and all that kind of crap. So.
Or tunnels under the ground where the drill breaks about halfway through.
Yeah, they got. Did they ever finish that tunnel?
It's done.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the people are already driving through it.
Oh, that's good. I hope we don't have a giant earthquake.
Hey, we help pay for it. We'll probably never see it. Kind of like the ferries, you know, we won't ride them, but we sure pay for them, you know.
Yeah, I mean, in upcoming shows, we'll have to talk about all the other ridiculous stuff. I mean, and not just anti-gun bills, but these carbon tax things.
Gosh,
I mean,
you guys, this is how ridiculous that. So if you guys know anything about Washington State, or you're from out of Washington State, this year our legislature went completely Democrat. In other words, the Democrats have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the governor's mansion. So, and they are just.
No, it's like this.
They're going nuts up there. I mean, you guys, we even have a bill that the Democrats filed that says that the farmers of Washington State have to declare how many slaves they have. That's how crazy things have gotten in Washington State under Jay Inslee's rule and Bob Ferguson's leadership.
Right, and I just wanted to point out that he is not being hyperbolic. It
not.
literally says slaves in the bill. It
literally says slaves. You have to report your slaves, peons, and there's one other term that they use there as well. But they want all the farmers to label on their products and on their shipping containers and on their websites that they employ slaves. This is the kind of legislation that we are getting out of Olympia right now. And there's just crazy things like that. Like you said, the carbon tax. They've went ahead and they passed the carbon tax after they have we voted on no on it as a state twice now. We've shut it down twice.
I think it's 6 or 7 times.
Yeah, I mean, we've shut this thing down over and over and over again, and the Democrats now even voting it down as even in our last election that we just had said no. And what are the Democrats doing? They passed it in the Senate.
Right. Well,
they passed it in the House, and
it's not technically a carbon tax because they don't call it a carbon tax anymore. You know, the thing they tried to do last year was the pollution fee.
Let's call it the clean air rule.
Well,
it's not dead.
Well, right. Alluding to another issue, but you know, then they called it a pollution fee for last year, and that still didn't work.
Right.
So really, what they did was they packaged up the same stuff, and then they put it into. It's almost like they put it into
the budget.
Well, it's almost like an Inslee Green New Deal, where he's pledging that Washington State will be fossil fuels free by like 2045, in the power generation.
Yep.
And for those that don't know, I mean, you know, the industry around here uses a natural gas power plant that's out there in the mint farm, and natural gas is the cleanest hydrocarbon based fuel you can use.
Yeah,
and it basically creates carbon dioxide and water that the trees next to the plant and all surrounding our area will use in photosynthesis and growing and being healthy. It is not pollution, it's actually food for plants.
I'm trying to figure out how I can get my hands on these carbon credits because apparently they're tradable and they're worth a lot of money. So
I think you got to go be a landscaper for Al Gore or something. You know, to get carbon credits. I don't know.
So they're trying to, you know, get rid of fossil fuels and all that. What I don't understand is why are they considering hydropower not green energy?
I don't know. They're trying to tear the dams down. I mean,
Well, they didn't consider hydropower green energy for the purposes of making the PUDs fund the wind power.
oh, by the way, you
infrastructure.
guys, I don't
because
know.
we buy a lot of hydropower, and so they
Yeah.
because when they're trying to force the PUD to buy wind farm power, that's when they said, well, hydropower isn't green, okay. So then it would force the PUDs and other power brokering firms to buy power from the wind farms and create a demand for these wind farms that nobody wanted to pay for anyways. But in this Inslee Green New
yeah.
Deal, as I'm coining the phrase today on our show,
Yeah.
okay, in the Inslee Green New Deal, he does consider the dams to be green power, because if we get rid of all the other ways that we make power, then we're going to need them.
By the way, I don't know if you guys saw this. I read an article yesterday. Klickitat County has a lot of interesting things going on over there. They have a landfill over there. They have the wind power farms over there. And now it looks as if there's a developer that wants to put a solar farm over there. That's going to power about 15,000 houses, I think is what it said. So that's going to be a big solar project over there now as well. And it's funny because they were talking about how this solar project here in California, or done here in Washington, it creates the power for 15,000 people. But if they did this same project, exactly the same in California, it would create power for 43,000 people because of the differences in the sun and the weather and stuff like that. So I mean, they're doing things to bring more renewable power here. But I mean, for them to say that we're going to kill it all by 2045 is, I mean, how? We better start breeding horses, you guys.
Yeah, what's really interesting is I read an article that said that they now have technology to turn carbon dioxide from the air back into coal.
I read that.
So essentially, coal is now a completely renewable energy source, and Inslee better look at coal in his Green New Deal as being a clean.
They won't. He hates
source
it.
of power.
He absolutely hates coal, and they
you know why? I think he was just bad when he was a kid, and he got too much coal
maybe
in his
that's
stocking.
what it was.
I don't know.
It was definitely some kind of grinchy, attitude-ish type of thing. But
And maybe that's why he doesn't sleep very well either. I don't know.
I don't
So
know
he's
anything
sleepy.
about his sleeping habits.
He just always looks sleepy, It's like somebody called him Sleepy J one time. I don't know.
Well, we call him Governor Goofy around here.
Yeah. Or the tax man.
The tax man.
Yeah.
He's really known as the tax man.
He loves taxes.
Well, this was a good letter. I really enjoyed it. Very powerful. If you guys get a few minutes to read it. Let's talk about, for a few minutes, we have a few minutes left. Let's talk about, we mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is a new show that we're doing, and we're going to try to be along the lines of political issues, focusing on learning the Constitution and teaching the Constitution. That is something that we've been talking about doing for a couple of years now, you and I. And so that's something else that we will be doing down on this show here, is taking a constitutional amendment and breaking it down and talking to you guys about how we view it, how we interpret it as an average citizen that has to every day live underneath that type of a rule. So I look forward to doing that, and there's not a lot of education on this, and so we want to encourage you guys that once we start getting these things going, we'll do a series of them, but we want your kids to watch these things. Our kids are not learning their rights, and they are not learning the Constitution and the gravity of it. So that's one of the driving forces of us wanting to do this show and getting this education out there. This is that more people are aware of what their rights are, because they just aren't teaching it to us. Kyle, you just graduated Kelso High School last year. I mean, how much education did they give you on this?
Well, to be fair, I wasn't in the AP classes, so they didn't really cram us with knowledge. But my memory of history classes was, okay, cut this picture out and let's glue it onto this sheet and color it.
In high school?
It was like history classes like freshman and sophomore year.
Really?
And then junior, we didn't. My senior year history class was just us watching, is War Through Film and Lit, so we watched war movies.
Right.
So Saving Private Ryan and...
One of these times I'll get my son, one of my older sons, to talk about the report that they had to do in school on democracy, and how they had to tiptoe around not putting any kind of Republican stuff down because their teachers are at school, whether they realize it or not, are passing on their political beliefs and things like that to the kids, however so. I mean, my kids have come home with some just absolutely crazy things. I'm like, where did you hear that? And like, well, our teacher said it. And I was like, well, your teacher's not supposed to be saying stuff like that at school, number one. And number two, I have always told every single one of my kids, even the ones that have graduated, that if you hear your teacher say something that is inaccurate or contrary to what I have taught you, you call that teacher out on that, because I'm not going to teach my kids something wrong about the Constitution and the rights and then have the school say, well, you don't get that. Because, as soon as you walk into the school, they tell the kids they don't have any rights anyway.
Yeah, right.
So, but anyway, things are getting crazy out there. And,
Yep.
we're going to try to educate more people on these things so that they can better defend themselves. And
Yep, and really another reason why I'd like to do this is because I don't know as much about the Constitution as I wish I did, and this is a vehicle for me for learning.
Right.
And so you guys are probably going to notice that we're not really super articulate on the subject yet, but we will get better. And if you see us making mistakes, please call us out, like Chris mentioned earlier, to the kid to call out his teacher. Call us out and let us know if you see mistakes we're making or anything like that, or if you want us to
or if you
bring up
want
a
to
certain
come on
topic.
and be on
Yeah.
the show and offer a different point of view. I mean, it could start an argument, but hey, we're all cool around here.
Yeah, just a nice, good debate. Now, there is an event happening tomorrow,
Oh, there is. Yeah.
correct?
Yes, there is an event. I don't know if we will be attending it because I think Kilburn's on call. Kyle and Kevin and I may go down. I don't know. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But tomorrow in Battleground at 1 p.m. They're in Battleground, Oregon, or Washington right now. The group Patriot Prayer is real active in our state, and of course in Portland if you watch the mainstream media. But these guys go around and they are educating people on 1639, and this group of people are actually fighting back by holding rallies and going around the state and trying to pass ordinances in cities and counties to support 1639 by either a resolution or becoming a sanctuary county, passing a resolution becoming a sanctuary county for the Second Amendment. So Battleground is their next stop. They were going to be doing a rally every Sunday in Battleground this month. And then towards the end of the month, they'll go and see if they can pass it in Battleground. But I guess the movement's growing down there, just like it is all around the state. I mean, even with our governor and our attorney general threatening law enforcement officers and business owners and citizens, that we will be forced to follow this law, people are still, not going to comply. Kind of like in New Jersey where they passed the clip, the clip ban on anything over 10. You're supposed to turn in your clips. To date, still, not one person is turning a clip. And that's what it's going to be around here, you guys. I mean, we have a bump stock buyback program in our state.
Oh, yeah. Well, so, what's interesting about the bump stock is it's essentially a piece of hardware that you can put on your rifle that mimics the action that happens when you loop your thumb through your belt loop and hold your hand in a certain position and then pull the trigger that way. So technically, if you guys wanted to make some money, cut your belt loops off your pants and turn them in as bump stocks. Hey,
Or just make pants that have like super industrial,
No.
Yeah.
like one belt loop
That's
on
probably
the right.
extra
I'm
money.
smirking.
Yeah.
It's me smirking.
Yeah.
It's not Kyle.
The other thing is too.
We have comments coming in that are just great.
The other thing too is for these battleground rallies. So they're having one tomorrow at 1, which is March 10th. But they're also, if you guys notice, they're having 2 more, at least 2 more. So March 17th and March 24th, which are the next 2 Sundays after tomorrow. They're also having rallies at 1 p.m. And I talked to the organizers for this a little bit, and he said they need people to turn out and show support for Battleground, the city, to make a resolution declaring themselves a sanctuary or a pro-constitution zone, if that makes you feel better. a sanctuary for the Second Amendment or a pro-Constitution zone, and to just come out and show your support. He thinks he thinks they already have a lot of support, and they're just trying to get the word out and make people understand what this is all about. It's not about what
Right.
other people that talk about sanctuaries. They're talking about a completely different issue, and so
Now here's where we get to toot our own horn just
Oh,
a
yeah.
little bit,
Okay.
and let me tell you why. For you guys who are watching, we are broadcasting from Longview, Washington, in Cowlitz County. Okay, so we're north of Portland, about 35 minutes. And just to throw this out there, because of this guy right here, no, this guy right here in the middle. This guy, his name is Kelburn Coons.
who, me?
Yeah, and
Oh, wow.
and the hard work of a couple other people. I think Aaron Babcock, is that correct? Is that his name? Cowlitz County was the first sanctuary county for the Second Amendment in the state of Washington. Aren't we the first people to pass resolution?
Yeah, we're at the county level. Cowlitz County was the first county to pass. It's technically an anti-1639 resolution. The language in it was not to be a Second Amendment sanctuary county. The language was to oppose the enforcement by any county officials, and then also by any officials from outside the county that want to come in and enforce it. That the county will not abide by it, and they will not put any funds toward it. Basically, they're just going to by whatever means they have at their disposal, they will oppose the enforcement
Right.
of 1639 within the county.
And I also stand that the local Republican Party has also passed some stuff on this as well. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So, so the local Republican Party, for those of you that don't know, I was elected chair to that party in December. Right now, I'm here just on my own doing this show. But so within the party, we passed a Second Amendment sanctuary county resolution, and then also part of that resolution directed the chair to let like city governments know, county governments know, other county parties in the state, and also state Republican Party officials to know what we were doing down here. And so I went ahead and did that, and with the help of some of the PCOs in our group, we also drafted a state level resolution so that the state Republican Party has the opportunity to pass a similar resolution and show their support for the Second Amendment. And so actually today, if they so choose, they will vote on the resolution at the state level within the Republican Party. And if they end up passing it, it will be because of efforts from Cowlitz County in creating our resolution and then getting it endorsed by the correct number of people within the state party. And then we also sent that to the state party to be checked out and adopted if they so choose. So if they do, then congratulations to us. That
you guys, we are
leaders in
one of
this.
the smaller counties in the state. We aren't the smallest, but this is the beginning of a movement of rural Washington coming together to tell our legislators in Seattle, because that's just what I call them. I don't say Olympia anymore because Seattle runs it all. To tell them that enough is enough. I mean, you guys have got to start thinking about the rest of the state, not just Seattle. You have to start thinking about how other people around you live, their beliefs, and how they may be different from you guys. But it's just really bad right now in our state, and I don't know how we're going to break away from this assault on the Constitution. But I'm hoping with shows like this that we'll reach more people and we'll get that out. But I think that's about the amount of time that we have today, you guys. We look forward to doing another show. This is still, like I said, in early development. We may change the name. We may do a bunch of different things, but you can count on at least one show a month about these type of topics. And thank you for joining us today.